basically their balance sheet has exploded $300 billion in 1 week, reversing 4 months of quantitative tightening. People are going to argue that this isn't QE, these are just loans, and that this won't affect the taxpayer, right? This actually will be paid off by corporations. I want to know what you guys think about that. If you guys think this will come back to the taxpayer, I want to know about, do you guys think this is the pivot? A lot of people talks about how something needs to break, right? They can't keep interest rates this high with these debt levels. Something will break. People are looking at these banks and saying, well, it happened. And now the money spigots are eventually going to come back on in full force. So maybe talk about, will this affect the taxpayer? And is this kind of the start of a new quantitative easing regime, accommodative monetary policy regime?
So I would say,
Go to you,
first
Mike.
of all, of course, it comes back to the taxpayer. It always comes back to the taxpayer. It's only going to go, oh, the banks are going to pay it. Well, the banks are going to pass those costs on, right? I mean, that's how business works, right? Businesses aren't there to lose money. They have to be profitable. And so if their expenses go up, then their prices go up. And so if the banks are going to have to absorb that, then it eventually falls back to the taxpayer. So of course it does. As far as, this argument of is QE inflationary, I think it's what I call factually correct, but intellectually dishonest. So what do I mean by that? All government intervention has an effect on the markets in inflationary or deflationary. And so, you could argue that QE isn't inflationary if you were to potentially strip out asset prices and only look at, this. But what it does psychologically is it starts to say, well, the Fed is now bailing out the banks, so then my deposits are safe, so then I'm okay to go spend more money. If I think the banking system is going to collapse, the financial system is going to collapse, I'm going to hoard my money. I'm going to stop spending, right? And that's going to be deflationary. But when I know that the Fed is pumping in money, right? They're bailing out the banks. They're putting money on the balance sheets. They're bailing out the system. The system's not going to collapse. Then I'm going to keep spending. I'm going to book that vacation. And so just by them doing that alone, I believe is inflationary.
All right, so I'm gonna be giving a slightly different answer. I'm gonna
come on, Tone, disagree.
Be the contrarian here. So I think that this huge rise in the Fed balance sheet in 1 week, I think it's blown way, way out of proportion. I see it as basically almost irrelevant from several perspectives. First of all, the whole COVID thing, the government chose to shut down the economy. The government chose to create inflation by shutting down the supply chain. They forced the lockdown on something that was completely unnecessary. So prior to the start of 2020, the Fed balance sheet was $4 trillion. Within 5 months, it went to $7 trillion. I'm looking at I pulled up the Fed balance sheet on Fred. So we went from $4 trillion to $7 trillion in 6 months in 2020. Then it grew to effectively $9 trillion, just a few billion off of $9 trillion. This was in 2022. In the middle of 22, it was $9 trillion. The Fed then dropped it from $9 trillion to 8.3 trillion. And now it went up a little bit back to 8.6. Like, to me, this is yeah, it's good. It looks huge like over a week span. But when you look at the last 2.5 years of the Fed balance sheet, this move is like this. It's completely meaningless. I don't think it's going to affect the taxpayer directly. But of course, everything affects the taxpayer indirectly. Like, I'm not going to sit here and say that what just happened, is not going to affect the taxpayer at all. But the taxpayer has like 20 problems that are bigger than this. Again, starting with the increase in rates affecting the cumulative debt of the government is the biggest effect on the taxpayer. The fact that inflation is still happening due to the government shutting the coordinated effort to shut down the world, that is affecting the taxpayer way more than the Fed balance sheet ever did. So the answer is yes, it is going to affect the taxpayer, a little bit more fees. And if the FDIC completely runs out of money and the FDIC needs to be bailed out, now the Treasury prints it, that's going to add to the debt that the taxpayer will ultimately have to pay. So yes, it affects the taxpayer. But of all the problems for the taxpayer, this thing that just happened with the banks is like 5% of their problems.
The only reason why I would somewhat, I want to kind of dig into that is that while Tone is absolutely right. I mean, as a percentage size of the move, it's small, right? But what's important when you're looking at charts is the speed and size of the move and the direction it's going. Right. And so I think to your point, it's a small percentage move, but it has erased about half of their work that they've been doing tightening. And it's the speed and size of the move. And more importantly, it's the direction of the move. It's knowing why they made the move and what other problems are out there in the world, like Credit Suisse, that's going to continue to have them making these moves. So, right, we're because markets are forward looking, right? We're always trying to guess, right? They're betting markets, trying to bet where the markets are going. So when you see a move this fast of this size because of the conditions that have been created, but then you see the rest of the conditions that are out there, then you would just go, well, this direction, this move is going to continue. It's going to sustain at this rate, most likely. So yeah, it is a small percentage, but it was a big and it was a fast move, and the problems are much bigger than what they've been able to solve so far.